Hello, everybody. We're going to begin talking about the introduction to homeopathy. Homeopathy was something that I learned about several years ago in a workshop for general wellness, and I was extremely intimidated by it. So for a couple of years, I didn't do really anything with it. But try to learn more. So I spent a lot of time learning, trying to understand it, make sense of it before I would even sort of discuss with anybody else that I was learning about this. Not because I was embarrassed by it, just because I didn't get it. I really didn't understand it. I had my essential oils handy, and that was sort of my modality. Now I incorporate both into a lot of the work that I do, and you won't hear me talk a lot about the details of it in the well-oiled canine group, just because there is a fair amount of education that I think needs to happen, and I don't want to just throw out names and terms like a lot of people do and then hope for the best with someone trying to use the stuff. So as we go, we will learn a little bit more in depth so that you can use this modality wisely in your own care and in the care of your pets. So what is homeopathy? By definition, it is the treatment of disease by minute doses of natural substances that in a healthy person would produce symptoms of the disease. So what does that mean? Basically, they use the ailment or the illness or the symptom, the thing that creates the symptom, to create a remedy. It can be chemical-based, it can be mineral-based, plant-based, or animal-based. So give you an example. If we are trying to remedy an exposure to poison ivy, right? We get the red, itchy, scratchy rash from poison ivy. The remedy is actually from the plant poison ivy. And they have created these remedies, and that's basically what they're called. By definition, they are a type of medicine. We call them remedies. I'm going to pour a couple out here in my hand so that you can see. Let me find the camera. See them there? Little pellets. Little tiny pellets, right? You are not supposed to touch them if you're going to use them, right? So some of the best, see, I get ahead of myself. Some of the best are in these little dispensaries, and we'll come back to this in a minute, but you're not supposed to touch them if you're going to use them. So these will go in the trash. But they are little pellets of a remedy. And how it's created is very scientific. You and I can't produce these. We cannot make homeopathics ourselves. We can often make a tincture or remedy. I mean, you've heard people blending herbs and using plants to create remedies and stuff. If you get into the science and the blending and the detail of all of that, awesome. I may be your customer. But it's not going to be something that I choose to do. I would rather leave it to the experts and use what they have created for us. But what they basically do is take the material that causes the ailment, and they create this mixture out of that then gets very heavily diluted an exponential number of times. So when you see something like this one is listed at 200C, This one is listed at 6C. This one is listed at 6C. You'll also see 30C in many cases. Basically what that means is they have created this tincture, if you will, this liquid substance, if you will, that is made from the ailment itself, so to speak. And I'm dumbing this down, y'all, for my own purposes, right? That then is diluted 100 times, right? Then a drop of that is diluted 100 times. In this case, 6 times. So it's 100 dilutions to the 6th power. Make sense? So they take a drop, dilute it 100 times, and they do that 6 times. A 200C will have been diluted 100 times to the 200th power. So that is a tiny, tiny, tiny amount. The more dilute something has been, the stronger the potency is said to be. So when you begin using these, ideally in the 6C, 30C is the general public, the general amount that most people will be dealing with, unless specifically guided otherwise to use something in the higher dilution range. Okay? Quality matters in this as much as quality matters in our essential oils, in our CBD oil, and any other product that we're using. We do not want to be dealing with products that are done poorly, that are potentially contaminated with whatever other substance or whatever methodology they've used to do extractions and dilutions. So quality absolutely matters. There are a couple of really good companies that are sort of the sort of top of the line, if you will. One is Boron, B-O-I-R-O-N, Boron. And they make these little, they look like little chapsticks, little pellets are in there. And the convenience of them is they have these little caps. I don't know if you can see this, but when I twist it, the little pellets fall down. You see the pellet in there? The little pellets fall into there. And I can make that go back in if I've dropped out too many. See, the pellet's gone now, and I didn't even open it. So if you're trying to dose out 3 little pellets, for example, these make that super easy. Washington Homeopathics is another good brand. This is my kit. This has 100 different remedies in it. They come in these little vials. These are harder to not touch. These are much harder to not touch because they're just open in there. They don't have that little dispenser. So I usually use a very long tweezer to get that out and to drop it on the tongue. What we're trying to do when we dose these is basically a sublingual application or a membrane application where we get it into under the tongue, in between the gum line, with the gum in the cheek, and let it dissolve and let it get absorbed. So if I'm giving this to a dog, I'll just sort of put it back in the flues of their mouth and let it dissolve into that. It's generally said that homeopathic remedies can do no harm, meaning if we chose the wrong remedy, we're still not going to create a problem. We're not going to create an ailment. We're not going to create a reaction. We're not going to create any sort of drama. There are no real side effects to using a homeopathic remedy. So when you see a medication advertisement, and down at the bottom you see all the potential side effects or some of the potential side effects. We don't have that same type of risk when we are using a homeopathic remedy. You may have an interaction effect, right? If somebody is taking medication, there could be a interaction between the two. So we need to validate and research that before using. Or for essential oils, for example, we don't want to give them at the same time. Meaning, if I'm going to be using an essential oil remedy and a homeopathic remedy, I generally separate their application or their disbursement with about 30 minutes between the time that they are presented. Okay. Generally speaking, we all take the same dose. So there becomes we're going to have a conversation in a separate discussion, right? But we have acute issues, and then we have those more chronic issues. An acute issue, you're generally going to be guided to use the remedy like 3 pellets, no matter who you are, size you are, any of that kind of stuff. And the same is kind of true for our pets, right? And for, it can be used in children. But in an acute scenario, we may do multiple dosages in like 15 to 30 minute intervals. Or you may start to see an improvement, do another dose, maybe an hour later, and then get on a daily schedule for a few days. Or you may be done, right? You may be done with the remedy once you have seen it. Poison ivy is a good example. When you see the redness go away and the itchiness go away, you may not have to do an extended dosage. If we are in something that's a bit more chronic, then you may have something to do on a regular basis. Where we see this used a lot in the dogs, of course, is pain, stomach aches, vaccine care. And so I'm going to come back. We'll talk about which ones to use when. But for example, with the vaccines, we often do a remedy like the day before, the day of, and the day after. Okay. And then with rabies, for example, we may wait to see if there is a reaction and then add a different remedy to it in response. There is basically no reason to say we've waited too long, right? If we believe it is connected to rabies vaccinosis, for example, then I could give that remedy pretty much at any time after. You will also hear, and this comes up periodically, there's a remedy we talk about where we say things have not been the same since whatever took place. And I was reading a situation recently about a dog that was having some tumor issues, and they basically tied it back to said the dog has not been the same since grandpa died. The dog was in grief. And so they looked for a remedy that applied into that scenario. Tumors went away, dog got healthy, went on about its business. And these are sort of one-time dosages, right? They're sort of one-time things in some of these cases that we see a response take place. That thought prompted me to go back to the discussion of when we talk about the remedy being basically the ailment, right? And again, I'm dumbing this down. But if we're looking to resolve poison ivy, for example, what are we using to remedy that? And it originated with poison ivy, right? It originated with taking the plant that creates poison ivy and making a remedy from that, okay? So you have heard me say this many, many, many times, and you'll hear me say it many more. Like supports like, and that is a foundational premise of homeopathy, that we're taking the thing that is problematic and using it to create a resolution. So we see that sometimes show up in essential oils, in Chinese medicine, in other areas, but keep that term in mind, like supports like. And when we're thinking about homeopathy, also keep in mind, hasn't been the same since what, right? There are some things that we can do if we don't really know, but we tie it back to sort of a time frame or an event or a procedure or an emotional trauma or whatever those things may be. We can then start to look at how to leverage homeopathy for resolution. Okay. I'm going to post a video. I'll try to find more than one, but I know of one where it talks about farmers who are using homeopathic remedies in like cattle drinking water and dairy cows to manage mastitis, right? And basically finding a better result, a more effective result than using an antibiotic at a far more affordable price. So homeopathics are not terribly expensive, but they can be extremely beneficial as an alternative to more traditional medicines. There is a book. It's kind of a beast of a book. It is not a reading book. You don't sit down and read chapters on it. This is the Homeopathic Materia Medica. So remember the spreadsheet that I talked about, and I call that my oils Materia Medica, right? And I track all the oils. This book is the same thing for homeopathy, right? So you can create your frequently used homeopathic remedies, but if you really want to get into the detail of it all, this is the book. And so when you open it up, it lists them all, right? It's alphabetical by remedy and what it does. And it'll give you some talking points about that. So let me just share. We're going to do more of these, but let me just share. Apis is one that comes to mind. Apis is one that if we have been stung by something, so think bee sting, bug bite, any of that kind of stuff. And if I knew my alphabet, I would have found it already. There's just so many. Apis comes from the honeybee. This will say, acts on cellular tissues causing edema of skin and mucous membranes. The very characteristic effects of the sting of the bee furnish unerring indications for its employment in disease, swelling and puffing up, or various parts, rosy hue, stinging pain, soreness, intolerance of heat, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to read this to you, all right? It's 4 pages on just that one remedy. But I'm going to help you start to understand what some of the more common ones you will want in your first aid kit will be. Apis is a good one, APIS. There are remedies that help remove tartar from teeth, beneficial for your dog, perhaps even for yourself. They come sometimes in tinctures. So this is one that I have on hand as a response to tick bites. If I find a tick on me and or the dog, we're going to work on remedy solutions as precautionary care, right? So take a look, Intro 101, what homeopathy is, and I will start sharing more of the which ones to use and why you would want to use them in your pet care. We will also talk about the ones to use for vaccine preparation and for follow-up, especially if we have a reaction to the rabies vaccine. So that's coming. Stay tuned.